things don't collapse. Cool. Prime Minister, whenever you're ready.
Can I just confirm that I'm audible?
Yes, you are perfectly audible.
Okay. All right. I'll start my speech. Now, to somebody who brutality and poverty is all they know, this is probably the best shot they're ever going to get at a semblance of normalcy. This is something which they're incredibly likely to take, and we've never been proud to propose. A couple of points of framing before I get into the substantive of my speech. I think this person is highly likely on the comparative to have a terrible, shitty life otherwise for six different reasons. The first is that due to the nature of their Eldian status, they're likely to be poor due to poverty and discrimination, ensuring that they never have a means to ever access some level of financial stability. But they also have to deal with regular systematic racism that is impressed upon them by the Marleyans. I'll explain later why that's so bad. But first, it's important to understand what low living standards look like. It looks like living in the slums in the ghetto, never having the chance to escape a room that is likely to be any larger than about 5 by 5. I think it's important to note also that this includes not being able to access the job that you want, not being able to live a happy life. And I think this already means that life you're currently living is probably quite bad, which means any shot that you have at getting out of it is probably likely to be quite attractive. The third thing to note here is that racial discrimination and internalized feelings of inferiority are things that weigh on you regularly. They feel like shackles holding you back. You probably want to break out of these things. They're probably quite bad. CF the apartheid, CF America in the 50s. The fourth thing to note here is that you have zero chance of breaking out of captivity. This is known in the future because Marley has all the control. They have all the weaponry. They have control over the systems of government. They have control over the politics. They keep you in this internment zone and have kept you there for the past 300 years. The fifth thing to note here is that you have regular oppression, routine killings of Eldians, the few that are trying to escape the internment zone, which means you are aware of the brutality which is oppressed and imprinted on those who do not subscribe to the system. You are aware that the system is all that you know. The sixth thing to know is that your parents probably have lived in this system and have oppressed the same things onto you. They've told you that the system is all that they know as well. And because of this cyclic cycles of depression and also oppression within society and within the system, you are very unlikely to think that there's any alternative outside of taking what is being prescribed to you by the Marleyan government. Now then, why is this likely to be sold to you absent all of this analysis on you having a shitty life? There's 5 reasons for this. The first is social conditioning within propaganda that tells you that this is good and something that you should go into. The first thing to note here is that oftentimes anybody else that sees that you have this opportunity to volunteer for the program is going to urge you to take it. Your parents are going to say, please, I want you to get me out of this hellish landscape that I currently exist in. Please, please, please join the program and succeed so I can get in. This provides a clear incentive for you to protect and raise your family. CF Ronaldo wanting to get better things for his mother. The second thing to note here is peer pressure and peer competition. This is something that you've been competing for since you were a child. Your other schoolhood, your schoolboy childhood friends have also been competing for this and are elated when you all get the chance, which means you probably have the chance to do this with some of your friends, which is probably going to be quite exciting for you. The third thing to note is that you know that you are going to die, but the propaganda they are selling you means that you don't care. It is outweighed by the glory. It is outweighed by the brilliance and glory of your youth, by the fact that life otherwise was likely to be shitty and short. I think on the comparative, we have a far better side. Fourth, brutality is all that you know. War is proximate and understandable, whereas everything else is routine and boring. And at best, just again, at best it's boring. At worst, it's this hellish escape that you want to escape. The fifth thing to note here is that you are aware of how great the life is of those who get to be part of the program. Regular parades, families being lifted out of poverty, your status being overwritten, your life literally changing its script. You get to turn a new chapter, and this is likely to be the only thing that you care about. The arguments, therefore, is simple. First, that you are able to provide eminence and status for your family. The reason and the incentive for the Malian government to actually raise your family out is because they don't want you worrying about your home while they're training you to become their elite warrior. They also just don't want you to be a shitty person. They don't want you to be a shitty warrior for them. They want you to be effective in the battlefield. As a result of this, they want to lift your family out of the poverty, out of the internment, out of the racism which they are aware because the Malayan government is literally creating this. What they do as a result is they provide a special area for these families where they're treated as class heroes. The importance of this is that even the Marleyans treat these families different at the point where the sons and daughters of these Eldians are fighting on behalf of the Marleyan government. Patriotism takes hold. It is foremost in people's minds. War fervor is the most important emotion in these instances, insofar as you're aware that Titans, who are literal gods on the battlefield are something which people presumably care about most. They are the foremost weapons of the Marleyan government's like army, and as a result of this fact, they are likely to be the ones that are most raised in people's minds and put on pedestals. The fourth thing to note here is that status is everything in this society, not just to level the playing field with Marleyans, but also to bring pride to your race and understand that you can be so much more than the label which was initially proscribed to you at your birth. Which is to say, I never thought I was ever going to be able to get out of this, but now I can. And I think for this reason, you believe that your life has literally been rewritten, that you've been changed. I'll take a point from opening opposition.
Why is joining military the only way through which you can enforce the feeling of patriotism? Just staying within this own land and protecting your family can also help you be more patriotic for your own community.
Yeah, there's several reasons for this. The first is that they were already considered to be an inferior class. I don't think there's any scope for them within this debate to ever be considered to be a patriot insofar as they're being routinely oppressed. I've already framed most of what Op is trying to claim here out. But the reason, moreover, like why we think that generally speaking, there is no scope for accessibility to any level of like success in your life is because you're not considered to be somebody who is capable of success unless you subscribe to this warrior program, i.e., unless opening opposition can magic out of thin air other ways which literally are not provided in the info slide for them to gain eminence in a society where they are literally undergoing systematic racism and oppression from a government which doesn't care about them. It is highly unlikely that you're ever going to get any level of benefit from these other methods that are as guaranteed and as certain as the system which we are providing for you right now in OG. Reasons why the program then is likely to be good. The first reason, they're likely to provide for you regular meals the first time in your life, not only to get you hooked on the program, but also just to enhance your mental state and athleticism, insofar as you are going to be their foremost warriors, your 9 elite warriors. You probabilistically want to ensure that these people are well fed and well kept. And the second thing to note here is that you want to keep your mental health stable. This looks like writing regular letters to your family, engaging in regular social settings, parties, and situations where you're able to take your mind off the massive burden of being one of the greatest warriors of all time. The importance of this analysis is to explain to you that the program is something that you are aware of is good because they sell it to you. They tell you from your youth this is something which everybody like has a massive amount of fun in and learns to become the foremost warrior of our society. Because think you never sell your army as being bad, but also I think it's important to consider the nature of the individual who is subscribing to this program. Note importantly in the info slide, it explains that you are volunteering. This means the three things for the debate. You have preemptively made this decision, i.e. you chose to opt into the system. The second thing that is likely is that you are either a genetic freak who is subscribed to the system because they are aware they are likely to succeed, or you are someone who is mentally prepared for this. You are aware of what it takes and you bought in anyway. This wasn't something that you were chosen for. It is something that you are actively volunteering for, which means it's likely that at least in your mind, you think that you are likely to win, which means even if you aren't likely to win, you believe it in your mind, which means you volunteer for the program in the first place. For all of those reasons, we are so proud to propose.
Cool. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for a fine speech. Invite Leader of Opposition to commence the case with Opposition Bench whenever they're ready.
Yep. No pure preferences. Starting on next one. Working within a company where you are expected to work more 20 hours every day and getting a better quality of life after that does not really make your life better. What I want to oppose from opening opposition is that you going ahead and joining this military as titans does not actually improve your quality of life, because the harm to your life is also increasing. You're expected to continuously fight and you're expected to continuously work, which means that you getting better quality of food, etc., does not matter to you enough, because you're also draining yourself a lot. So this is something that's bare minimum. So opening comments, that stance does not really make sense. Second, on patriotism, I also want to note that opening comment does a terrible job in explaining what does the status quo really look like for these identities. They explain that you live within poverty, but this is just the economical aspect. The social aspect of this world looks like you having some family or some friends, and this is especially true for minority classes because they already or are dependent upon each other for providing them support in these more desperate times. And this is also the reason why they are able to survive for long enough, because surviving racism alone is quite tough, which means that the narrative within these communities is that we are there for each other and we want to protect each other. This explained why your patriotic narrative is not contingent upon the entire nation or the Malian government. Your patriotic narrative actually derives from this specific community. Like, I want to protect my community, not my nation at that specific instance. Third, I think it is your inherent obligation, which has been told to you again and again, that we are the one who are protecting you, not the Malian government. Hence, we are the one who are you most obligated to. And this is true for a lot of reasons. Like your family, even in the worst instances when only one of you can eat, providing you first as a child because you are younger, as opposed to them actually making sacrifices, which means you have a more obligation to your family, but also to your community in general. There is a general narrative within this community that children are the most important one. We do not want our race to get eradicated, and that is why he in general protect your community, even if that's not family. Two things on setup. First, what's the narrative against being Titan, and second, what does the incentive look like? First, the narrative against society. Context like states that the reason you are considered as second-class citizens is because you have already worked as Titan, your community is engaged within warfare, which means that there is a general perception that you attaining the ability of becoming Titan is something that society in general does not want. A number of reasons for this. First, I think it reinforces the narrative that you are the someone who has been doing harm to society, like killing other individuals or doing humanitarian crime or like war crimes in general, which means that this is the identity that you always criticize yourself because this is the reason why your community is being ostracized within status quo. Second, I think this is also your family's justification to you, which means your family said that yes, maybe our ancestors were terrible because they were engaged in wars. We should not do that because that's the only way through which you feel that you are able to redeem yourself as within this specific community, which means that your family is constantly told that it is a bad thing to join these titans in the first place. Third, I think society in general has been seeing multiple people being oppressed by the Malian government, and they believe there is a general narrative that we going ahead and betraying our community is what makes the Malian government more oppressive. Because if we do like give away our own community, the men or like the teenagers from our community are going away, and that's what makes this community worse. Fourth, I think there are multiple narratives within this community which in general says that we can make our community stronger. Maybe even if this is not true, I think the general perception that people have that maybe there is some hope, maybe our life will get better on later on, is something that still exists within the society, which in general makes you as a teenager believe that your existence within the society can help you better. Oftentimes within minority communities, there are small groups or community centers in which you obviously discuss the future of your society. So even as you being a minority community, you can still go ahead and get better later on, or there exists some hope. What this proves on the ground is that there is a very strong stigma against you joining this specific community, even if the economic benefits is quite much, but quite much. Second, what's your incentive? I think the gov benefit suggests that your life for you and your family is going to get better. A lot of things in this. First, your life for family does not get better because now you're actually isolated from your entire community. So maybe you get selected in the top 13, but your friends does not, which means that there is an active resentment between you and your friend that you are actually a betrayer, which means your family ends up becoming feeling worse and worse. Second, even if the other person who is also becoming this titan is from your own community, it is still not clear, but that's enough because now you're restricting yourself within a smaller community, even within a minority, which means that you're already restricting your interaction. Third, I think it is also restricting your agency because you're now unable to do things that you are earlier used to doing. Oftentimes within minority, there are certain festivals and there are certain things that you do to enjoy yourself or having some form of agency, which means that these are the things that you are now isolated you from, which means that you going ahead and celebrating like intuition of Christmas is something that does not happen on their side of the house because now you're actively isolated. Maybe the quality of event gets better, but the social aspect of this is something that you go away on their side of the house. This explains why it is generally bad for your family. What's your incentive? Two things are incentive. First, you're a teenager, which means that you are actively having some form of emotions and some of a desires that you want to do later on. What does this look like? This looks like actively forming relationships, or this also looks like actively supporting your family because once you're very, very poor, there's a in general a desire within yourself that you want to give upward social mobility to your family and you want to revolutionize your family, or you do not want to remain have the same legacy, which means that your incentive to do better is existing, but simultaneously your incentive to do better for yourself is also existing. What's the harm on their side? Why do you not feel good for yourself? They suggest that you're going to have a better life because you get good food and you get good powers. A lot of things in this. First, even if you get power, you're still working as a slave under the Malian government, which means that you are constantly feeling this dilemma that I'm powerful but I'm still weak, which means that in general does not give you happiness. On outside the house, you in general feel live within this Malian government, but there is no pressure. Like yes, there are some economic constraints, but you can do whatever you want. You can celebrate festivals with your family. On their side of the house, you're deprived of these things because you're expected to go out and constantly fight, which means you in general feel like a less dignified person, but simultaneously have less agency. Before I impact this further, anyone from Gov?
Yeah, I think at best, at the end of your speech, you've given competing reasons for why your framing might be true, which sidesteps all of the reasons we provide for why society is going to be shit, and you're only going to want to buy into this. Please provide tips.
So I think I have already explained the likelihood analysis that you likely to believe that your society is in general comparatively better because that is the only supporting mechanism or that only keeps you going on in this terrible society. So the R reasons matter more. Lastly, the last explanation I did explains that while you going out and working in this titans is something that does not give you a dignified life. Why? What does give you dignity? Two things. First, being physically present for your family in instances of a harm. So just because you're economically rich does not mean your bare minimum life is getting better. Like for example, going outside, celebrating things within your family, maybe internal family conflicts, etc. You being actively present for your inter-family conflict actually gives you more dignity because now you're in general feeling more proud. Second, I think you in general get a lot of responsibilities after you become elder with time, which means that if you go on their side of the house as become a titan, you're actually not fulfilling all of your obligations in instances, which means that you're in general feeling bad. But third, you're actually going to die after 13 years. So it's again not clear after you die whether your family is going to feel good or whether you're going to feel bad, which means that it is very likely that you're not able to fulfill all of your internal desires that you had right now and not able to form relationship or simultaneously living a terrible life, or your family does not consider you as good enough, which means that it's very, very unlikely that you have a dignified life on their side of the house. Lastly, I think what you do on their side is what your everyday life looks like on their side is you going and killing other Malian, other people from your own community. All of these things explains that you in general feel more and more worsened, and now you're self-actualizing that you are the one who are you used to oppose in schools when you said that there is a legacy that we were involved in violence, which means that this internalization makes you feel like a terrible person.
Cool. I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for fine speech and invite Deputy Prime Minister to close the case of opening government whenever they're ready.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
I'll take a POI from closing preferably, and I'll start with my first word. It is simply untrue to believe that minorities feel like their identity is collected and connected to their own nation rather than their own community. I want to give you two very basic examples. I want you to look at the systemic oppression and racism faced by the Uyghur Muslims in China and how they're systemically isolated from the rest of their society. I want you to look at the refugee crisis faced in Bangladesh and Myanmar by the Rohingya Muslims that are constantly isolated from either parts of their countries and are not accepted by anyone. This is the similar state to what the actors community goes through. We think that Eldarians, or whatever the fuck the pronunciation is, do not feel connected to their own country for a multitude of reasons. I think the first is regardless of state indoctrination, even if opening government is correct and that they've been extremely successful in wiping out these narratives, we think communal stories still exist, which means I know an uncle whose grandfather was probably shot dead by these people for asking for more food. I have examples of how people are kicked on the street every day when their demands are not met and where their pleas are not heard. We think communal stories are exchanged massively, and these are the things that keep these communities together in the first place. And these narratives are always going to be stronger than whatever it is that state is able to influence in you, because these are people that you know about, these are people that you walk around with, these are stories that you've heard from people that you love, and this is always going to be far more proximate to you than any story taught to you by indoctrinated schools and counter narratives that the state can probably run. But secondly, you interact and feel the shame on a day-to-day basis when individuals point fingers at you and laugh at you for being of the wrong caste and of not like being worthy enough of deserving a better meal or of getting a better salary. We think the fact that these people constantly push you out is further reinvigoration of you that your own community is the only person and the only set of individuals that actually do love you and are going to care about you, which means any of their benefits on like these Marlians probably loving you more, it's extremely unlike just does not matter to these individuals, because according to their own analysis these are individuals that have hated them, which means you don't want their validation, you want the validation of your own people. But also you have your own self-respect, you have history of being an extremely powerful tribe and cult that had roamed around and had been extremely successful and powerful, which means that now when when you reduce to these minorities, I think you still retain some level of that self-respect. You don't want the Marlians to trust you or to make you feel better. I think it's far more important to you that your own community feels better. The first thing I want to do once I've like clarified this clash in identity is prove why people actually have a multitude of options and why they're prepared for scenarios like this. I think the first, given their own characterization that everyone in this community probably wants to become a titan, means that there is massive amounts of competition for only 9 individuals getting selected. I think just by the fact that there are at least 1,000 individuals within this community means that the acceptance rate is extremely marginal, and it means that families and individuals themselves hedge their bets for for the most part, they're prepared that this is not a life that they're likely to get, which means they don't really have too much amount of FOMO when their other neighbors get out, because they know that their own capacity to succeed and get these jobs is extremely little. But also, they have backup plans, which means you probably know that your child is not going to get these things. You're okay. You're still going to love them for the rest of their lives. But I think you're also prepared to offer them multiple other things that they can do. Yes, maybe I am underpaid, but maybe I can work harder. Maybe I can get a promotion. Maybe I can open up a farm or a small business within my own community and exchange and barter goods. That makes everyone happier. We think that the guilt that you experience by not getting selected is marginal because people are already okay with this idea and have more or less accepted that the competition is far too high. But I want to posit that the guilt you face once you do get selected is massive. This is true for a multitude of reasons. I think the first is only your immediate family is helped, which means that in these minority neighborhoods where just intuitively more people live with their close relatives, which means I probably share a home with my grandmother, with my uncle, with my like nieces and like nephews and things like that. The point at which you're only able to save your father, your mother, and probably one sibling, hopefully, makes you feel massive amounts of guilt because you know that the people that have raised you for the rest of your life are still going to suffer. There is unlikely for you to be able to send any money back to these individuals because the Maldians probably just don't like want that to happen because that reduces the incentive for other people to volunteer in the future. We think the guilt that you experience by these severed relationships because you can't go back to these individuals either because the Maldians don't allow you, but also because you probably won't be accepted because now you're labeled as the individual who took the closest people to them and abandoned the rest of their community, means that you feel massive amounts of guilt and that you lose out on these relationships forever. The last thing I'm going to prove is why life is actually worth living and why 13 years is just not enough for a teenager. We think that all of their analysis that, oh, you probably lived their full life is bullshit because read the info slide. You die in 13 years. This means that in the best case, if you're selected as a 19-year-old, you die at 32. But most often, you probably die at 26 or 27. We think as a teenager, this thought is extremely stressful to you, right? Which means that you probably may enjoy extra leg room in your like in your bed. Maybe you might enjoy some better quality of meals. But the fact that you're a teenager and you have to grapple with the thought of dying in a couple of years is extremely stressful for you, which means that you're constantly thinking about how your lifeline is running out and your own capacity to enjoy these things becomes marginal. You write letters to your family and you stress them out as well because they constantly feel extremely scared of what they've signed you up for. They probably don't want to lose you so early because you're still a kid to them. We think you get extremely marginal returns within the 13 years. Maybe you're able to have fun for a few years. I'm unsure as to why that really matters. Before I expand on why your current life is so much more better on comparative, I will take closing government.
Who do you most interact with as a person?
Your community, like your family. It's not just your mom and dad. You live with your uncle, you live with your cousins. You don't have enough houses for everyone. So anyways, the point then that I'm trying to make is that life is still worth living as a teenager for a couple of reasons, and why you don't want to trade this off for marginal benefit in a handful of 13 years. I think the first is you still want to experience love, you want to experience joy, you want to have sex just because it's an evolutionary need, but also because society conditions you to want these things. You want to grow old with your loved one, you want to hold their hands, and you want to just like have better relationships that you have within your own community. But also, you're able to build on small successes. You don't have to become one of the 9 most powerful people ever, but you can make gradual successes, like maybe doing a slightly more efficient job, maybe opening up a small business, maybe being able to have just a better marriage for your cousin and being able to organize communal events. These are small successes, but these are far more important to you because on net, the longer you live, the more you have happier instances, which means that the utility that you can derive for like is just greater than what you can enjoy in the few marginal years that you probably live. But also, most importantly, this is extremely proximate to you. You don't have to think about speculative benefits about whether or not your parents are happy now that you've uplifted them. But now you feel this joy on a day-to-day basis. This is the most proximate thing to you because you experience this firsthand and you can continue to experience it for the rest of your life, and you may live a much happier life. Don't trade it off for a few years that you won't enjoy because it's diminishing. Vote for opening opposition.
Cool. I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for a fine speech and also because on behalf it's been a great debate so far. Now it's the back half. Member of Government, whenever you're ready.
Hello. Oh, let me turn on the camera first. Okay.
Hello.
Y'all hear me? Perfect. Okay then. My speech was starting 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think like firstly, what I would do in my speech is like first tell you why this is just a good thing to do. Like even if you don't get accepted, this is a good thing to do just because of the opportunity. It's fucking. I won't do my thumb. Okay, why this is a good thing to do even if you like get rejected, right? Why is this such a good thing to do? Why is this to and also like how and also this refuting OO because like I think OG is very actually fragile to OO, right? I think OJ's case is very fragile to OO because it's you. What matters to you matters a lot. And I think OO is correct to point out that like for ethnic minorities, like their own culture tends to matter a lot. I'm gonna refute this first. Firstly, let's like frame this, right? I feel like there's been a lack of framing. So how does I think this is like basically I feel like having segregated areas, right? Having segregated areas in a militaristic society. What does this look like? I think and often what does this look like, right? I think what this means is that you have no social services, right? I think like militaristic societies are very frugal over. Okay, I'm not gonna talk about that. Okay, I think basically, I feel like militaristic societies firstly value resource frugality, right? They want to use all resources for the war machine. They want to use all the resources for like the industry that sustains their military, right? But this means that it's very frugal. And when the Marlians are already frugal, do you think they will spare any resources to give any social services, give any kind of services, even policing services to these like minority people, right? The Eldians. Well, I don't think so. So what? So I think like it's a segregated zone, right? But unlike status quo, I think they will not act. They will only send people to like actually like. Okay, I don't think there will be education system to actually propagandize it. I don't think there will be much. I think the only information you get as a Eldian is that like from the only information you get as an Eldian is because you're not able to access the parades because parades are for like Marlians only probably, right? So like what the only thing you're able to access is like stories, right? Why is this most important? So why is the most important? I think like firstly like the government propagandizes a lot, right? They need I think a lot of like I think volunteering to a degree is normalized. I think this is a very totalitarian society. They have a lot of secret police. They have a lot of like things, right? I think that means that you don't have freedom of assembly to have festivals, to have to have these traditions where people gather and feel a sense of community. You need right. You need the ability to assemble. But often these areas, right, firstly, they're crime ridden, which means like the social cohesion, social solidarity is like often lost because when there are low demands of things, right, I think the Marlians probably don't care on aid Eldian crime, right? You probably ignore those, right? What this means is that like Eldians are now Eldians are mostly fighting against Eldians. Sure, Marlians are the ones who control the supply of things, but like often Eldians will be fighting for Eldians for food. Eldians will be fighting for Eldians for like fuck. Eldians will be fighting Eldians for clothes, all these kind of supplies, right? Desperate like supplies that you need for surviving, right? So what this means, I'll take it 5 minutes. So what this means is that, like, I think the sense of social cohesion is actually not very existent here, right? Now, secondly, I think there will be a lot of like, propagandizing, right? I think like sure, I don't think like there will be schools. However, I think there will be a certain like so I feel like like destroyed OO's case of like why there will be social a sense of social solidarity because like when people are desperately fighting for desperate supplies, foods and stuff, right? I think then this is when social solidarity collapses. I think this is when people actually turn on family and turn on like relative families. Right? I think uncles start stealing from like their cousins' foods, right? I think this is the so like I think like social solidarity. What most matters here is then like parental relationships, sibling relationships, because these are the most close relationships people have. These are the most close relationships people are able to access and are actually most loyal to, right? Most loyal to, uh, most loyal to, right? I feel like parents have a very strong love of their children, and I think siblings I feel like, well, I think siblings have a very strong love for each other, right? What this means is that like these people are the most trustworthy within your group. So your close family members are the most trustworthy, right? Also there's child mortality is probably very high, right? Like at best, like 3 children survive out of the 8 that are born. I think like what this means is that like firstly you have few aunts and uncles if they even survive. I think there are a lot of crime. I think there's no healthcare. I think this means that like people die a lot, right? I think this is survival is very rare, right? For these Eldians. What this means is that like you have a big incentive. What this means is that like this is a like I think like this is the only chance to get out. POI taken.
Even within the most authoritarian states, like for example North Korea, people just don't say that we are okay in surrendering everything. There are multiple instances when people want to flee to South Korea, or people are circulating CDs and DVDs or Netflix shows using VPNs, which means that people do care about their identity, and it is likely that they want to remain within this community.
Firstly, like North Koreans watching South Korean media is not North Koreans caring about their identity. I think this is not, like North. I think this is merely like seeking catharsis, right? Secondly, I think like North Koreans, if they had a chance, they would want to climb up their social ladder. They would want to actually access this like thing, right? Certainly, why will there be like media about this Eldian culture exist in the first place? I think like media traditions, these all the historical documents will be all erased, right, by the Marley government. Their cultural artifacts will all be gone. I don't think they'll have a culture to rally around. They only know something as a racialized group. What this means is that like. What this means is like the solidarity of the Eldians are gone. Now, what this means is that like, and also, I think like from the fact that like the Marlians are probably the ones who are providing the food, right? Because like I think the Marlians probably don't want to get involved in the dirty business of like the Eldians. So like they probably just give the food, make sure they're not assembling together, and then just leave, right? But because this is the most easiest low resource way to do it, and military societies value frugality. What this means is that like this is the most common way, and when this exists, I think like then there's less antagonization against the Marlians. I think like just because you're segregated doesn't mean you're constantly under attack. Sure, they might be I feel violent clashes, but this is not. But you also probably experience the same amount of violent clashes against Eldians also. And then this is good because, like, sure, firstly you feel less guilt. Secondly, you probably see this chance as a big promotion to increase your quality of life, right? I'll be doing the impacting them later in my speech.
Cool. I'd like to thank the member of government for a fine speech and invite member of opposition to start the case rather for closing opposition.
Wait, am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are clearly audible and at least visible by avatar.
Oh, is my cat on?
Yes, it is.
Oh no, it doesn't. Okay, perfect. Okay. Let me just set up my timer. Cool. I'll start my speech. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I think debaters have a tendency to over-intellectualize simple things. This debate is not about a fucking debater who has thought and weighed all of his options. It's a 13-year-old child. And that is exactly why CEO would win. Because propaganda, as OG clearly frames that what this debate is about, can frame death as noble, it can make obedience feel virtuous, it can make loyalty seem like love, but it cannot rewrite the biology of fear. It cannot remove the body level horror of knowing I will turn into a giant, I will scream, I will kill, and no one will recognize me, not even me. Even if the child says yes with their mouth, their body already knows the truth. 4 reasons for this. 1, children process monstrosity before ideology. What this simply means is, before a child understands politics or patriotism, they understand shame, fear, and gut-deep aversion to hurting others. Even Marleyan education can't stop this because the transformation is visceral, painful, and grotesque. The Titans are not graceful, they're distorted and violent. You lose your human form, you crush people beneath your feet. The child does not need to know about power, they only need to know what it feels like to imagine their own body turning into something that can kill, which is existential fucking horror. The child has no real conception of legacy, but they feel the trauma of becoming unrecognizable. Marley tells them, you'll be honored, respected, and remembered, but the child doesn't picture legacy. They picture screaming while changing, watching people run from them, knowing their mother won't recognize what they've become. Even if no adult speaks of it, they've seen the way other warriors look, haunted, hollow, tired of smiling, and the child's instinct says something about that is wrong, that can't be what life is supposed to be. This fear is proof that something inside them has not yet been broken. Even if they're loyal, even if they're selected, even if they step into the chamber, there is always a second before transformation when the fear breaks through, not of death, but fear of becoming a stranger of themselves. Why does this win? Because OG relies on the idea that the child can be fully molded. We say conditioning can make you comply, but it cannot make you whole while doing so. That fear is the last surviving instinct of a person who knows no one should have become best to be safe. The second thing is that the Eldian child does not fear death, they fear transformation, because they know even in the margins of their mind what volunteering really means. The warrior child is taught that they will be a hero, but they've seen what warriors do. They've seen titans flatten cities, devour people, torch everything. They've heard stories from the front lines, the trauma, the slaughter, the screams, and deep down they know this isn't honor, this is monstrosity. You are being asked to not just accept that image, but to inhabit it, embrace it, and perform it. They feel it in their fucking stomachs that if I say yes, I will never be able to be touched the same again. They know their mind won't belong to them. Even before inheriting the Titan power, they've seen it. Their predecessors are twitchy, paranoid, and fucking hollow, and they realize this is a program. So the child wants to say no, even if they can't explain it. They're too young to use words like alienation, instrumentalization, state narrative production that all of us debaters do. But they know that I won't be me. Even if I survive, I will disappear. And even if my mother is proud, she will be proud of someone who isn't really me. Okay, why is life so bad on their side of the house? Because your life is one of total surveillance and conditional worth. You are fucking choreographed. From the moment you volunteer, your existence is no longer your own. You are not rewarded with autonomy. You are turned into a tool that must constantly validate the regime's story at school, at war, in public, even in your own home. Every action is monitored, and your family's survival, family, by the way, which weirdly is OG's tipping point, is conditional on your obedience and enthusiasm. You live inside a permanent military apparatus. Every warrior candidate is housed in state-run barracks. You are trained, monitored, tested daily. Your physical and psychological status is locked. You're not allowed to leave camp freely. You're taught military history from Marley's perspective and required to recite state loyalty pledges or something like that. So your social role is not soldier. You become a fucking mascot for obedience. Your family's safety is explicitly tied to your compliance, and this directly fits OG's claim that your family's gonna have a fun time. The honorary title for your family only exists as long as you behave. If you question an order, show hesitation, express sympathy for other Eldians, you lose your power, your family loses protection, and you're quietly disappeared or fed to the next successor. But most importantly, after those fucking 13 years, when you get that big parade that OG really likes, you have also essentially killed your family's grief, because they cannot now publicly say, this was an injustice, if only we had known better. But also then, your own grief is managed. You're allowed to mourn your fellow warriors only as Marleyan heroes. You cannot say they were children. You cannot say they were used. You must call their deaths honorable sacrifice. And when your 13 years are up, you're celebrated in parades, statues are built, but no one asks whether you were ever allowed to say no. The comparative here is simple. Even if OG proves that you gain a better life, you lease a stage role under constant direction. And the moment you drop a line, your family falls with you. So this is literally fucking mutually assured destruction. Why is, on the comparative, life low-key not that bad? Before that, any POIs?
Every 13-year-old in Call of Duty dreaming of being a Navy SEAL contests your claim. With the info slide suggests you can shift between these forms easily. We give lots of reasons why the government wants to keep you happy, and the brutality of your community is more proximate.
Guys, I really don't think a fucking 13-year-old's dream is to turn into a monster, go out into war, kill people who look exactly like them. Even if this is the dream, I say this is a coerced dream because of your own characterization that this is probably massive amounts of social conditioning. So this dream literally is not a fucking legitimate choice. So this child cannot inherently volunteer off of his own free choice in and of itself. But also, low-key, life isn't that bad. You suffer, but you're free. You may live in a ghetto, but you can cry when you want to. You are not paraded in uniform, made to smile for cameras, or told what your story must be. You can be bitter, silent, rebellious, faithful. You can feel what is true for you. So you actually have more agency on our side of the house as opposed to them. You have community. You are not set apart from your families, feared by your neighbors, or praised by your oppressors. You are in grief together, in struggle together, in memory together. You attend underground funerals. You speak and quote about the old fucking world. You whisper stories about Eldian kings, about the sea, about the island. So you share a fucking culture that is far more assuring than that military parade. But finally, you can still be human to your loved ones. You can care for your siblings without militarizing your body. You can die without having killed for others like you. Your family can cry for you, not clap for you. Simple reason we win is because this is a fucking child. Even at his lowest, he knows some fear. We say that this is not a free choice. Very proud to oppose.
Cool. I'd like to thank the member of opposition for a fine speech. I'd like government whip to summarize the proposition bench whenever they're ready.
Is this a good volume?
Yes. Just so you know, this is being recorded, so you weren't here initially. Are you fine being recorded?
Okay, thank you.
Well, it was rather a question. Are you fine with being recorded? You can say no.
Oh, yeah, I am fine with being recorded
Okay, no worries.
as of now. Thank you. The first question I want to answer as a whip is what will happen if you don't apply? And I guess to answer this question, we have to think about why everybody in this community applies. This institution of oppression has existed for a very long time and is clearly impossible to destroy, i.e., there are multiple iterations, enough for us to believe that every 13 years there will be a new warrior. And if you're the first batch of warriors, then I think the first half of CO just doesn't work. So this is to say that I think that this institution needs to exist for a long time. But I also think that the segregation is set up to drive wedges between Eldians. The government is clearly okay with granting rights to certain Eldians based on their contributions to things like the military, and these positions rely on Eldians being stripped from their rights in order to work, right? So you need Eldians to be deeply oppressed for them to be drawn towards certain rewards and bonuses, like being respected a little bit more or your family's like gaining some degree of welfare. So they have no access to foods, no access to clothes, supplies, and they're forced to fight. And this is kind of the same way the US indoctrinated blacks and Hispanics to internalize racism and absorb, say, white beauty norms, because they understood that by pushing these things, by pushing this degree of supremacy onto people who genuinely have no room to move, these people will just then absorb and internalize the racism and direct it towards their peers. All of this analysis is to say that I don't think the Eldians particularly like each other. Their encounters are oftentimes in bad scenarios where it is during some particular crime or during some particular competition or just watching as people in front of you cut in front of you for like the food line. So I often think that a lot of these community bonding and like to the solidarity you get through struggles and whatnot are very much easily destroyed by a government who has this degree of control. And I think that a government who has the, I guess, foresight to set up warriors from these Eldians and who is willing to clearly go against certain of their particular principles of just oppressing them no matter what is probably also going to be the manipulative type that is able to manipulate these types of social engineering. Other reasons for why everybody applies. They're poor. I think that this is heavily, heavily propagandized in whatever version of education or media distribution exists for these second-class people. It is probably a golden ticket that stands head and shoulders above all other opportunities. The way selection day gets treated in this country is probably the same way I imagine like China would treat like a super gaokao, like a gaokao on crack, right? Like this is the opportunity and the only instance when an Eldian might be recognized for all of their troubles and why this is going to go well. The first thing I want to respond to then is CO's idea of why it is that your actions are also just, or you're going to just see other people like warriors' lives and you're going to be like super depressed about it. The first reason's a little bit silly, but it's also incredibly true. The warriors die after 13 years, and also you select a new warrior every 13 years. So the previous batch of warriors is 9 people from like 13 years ago who you get to pay attention to like never because they're always deployed in the battlefield and then they just fucking die. So like presumably for the average child, it's very easy to be indoctrinated by these things. Second, I think that it is just difficult to follow their movements. The government probably hides this to like a heavy extent. And if the government has as much leverage as CO says of like not like behaving in opposition to the military, of not like showing any weakness, then I think that the average child is also going to think that these are just heroic figures having a very good time. So I really don't understand how this access to information is going to manifest, given a lot of the issues that CO identifies. What is our impact then? Because I think that Bill Goon's actually pretty clear about this, and I think the response is sadly a bit uncharitable. Um, the first point is that people will suspect that you are disloyal. There will be additional scrutiny on your family. And I think this is a very reasonable point given our version of the framing. I think it's much deeper than OG's, right? Like front half recognizes that this is like important for people and community matters. We prove that everybody is doing this test. This is the thing which socializes most Eldians and how they grow up thinking that this is their ticket to freedom. And therefore why like every single Eldian within their friends, like with their friends, with like whatever like essence of community actually existing are probably thinking about these things. And they probably report to the Marleyan superiors about how they're going to do these things. That's the difference between our analysis and why we're winning. But as I was talking about, there's additional scrutiny on your family, and people probably just think that you're rather disloyal, right? So like if there is like, I don't know, the same way a nun probably ran like a Canadian residential school and a lot of the like the bad things you do in that school get reported upwards, I think that the oppressive Marleyan teachers find out that you have no interest in going to this particular thing. It is after you reveal it to your parents, something, a secret that they have to hide from other families as well. And this disloyalty has a couple of implications. The first one is just that your family will probably be harassed, and there's a number of reasons for this. The first is because the government and just not just the government, but like at smaller levels, very low levels, like power structures want to make an example of you. The fact that this person didn't have the bravery to and actually had the gall to be arrogant enough to not even want to apply for this position because they were concerned about personal safety is probably an arrogance that should be like made an example of. You should harass this family. You should point out that this family is clearly committing some degree of like treason to the entire country and how they are like a burden on all Eldians. And I think that this degree of harassment makes, I think, the reward of not being harassed and maybe even being treated rather well, a reward which is entirely very compelling. But I'll be happy to hear from OO first.
So even in states which are very liberal and you give affirmative action, a lot of minorities still choose to stay at home because they believe that the staying at home is their more important moral obligation and their family is going to be stay better at that point. You do not engage with opening opposition analysis that your family is going to pressurize once you leave.
So let's engage with opening opposition then. There are cases that you're going to like stress your family, and that like you're gonna feel guilty, you can't help your entire community, and that returning the return you get within 13 years just isn't that good. To respond to the POI part, it's I don't think you actually prove this in your case, and I think that the circumstances here are uniquely different. I think that in a lot of cases, people are poor, yes, but they still get to maintain community, and the oppression is significantly more, I guess, like hidden and subconscious. The oppression here is very much clear and laid on the table. On stressing out your family, I don't think OO goes nearly deep enough to prove why you're going to stress out your family that crazily deeply. I think that your family gets stressed out way more when you're trying to be different from the vast majority of Eldians, and I think that this is a social pressure that forces conformity greater than anybody in the round is able to prove. On like you feeling guilty that you're not able to help your entire community, I proved why you're probably quite detached from your entire community. You might have a few friends here and there, but the Eldian identity isn't one to be proud of. And then on the return within the 13 years, I don't really care about this being good or not. The fact is, most people aren't willing to disobey orders out of fear of becoming a Titan just because they were socialized to believe that these things were possible, and that's why they're probably fine with it. Thank you very much.
Cool. I'd like to thank the government whip for a fine speech and invite opposition whip to close up the debate whenever they're ready.
Can I just get 30 seconds? I need to set up my timer, etc.
Sure.
Am I clearly audible? Like there's no breaks in the voice or something else.
No, it's clearly audible.
Okay, perfect. I'll start on my next word. I'll start with pushing closing government out of this debate because they've been running a very confusing case for me throughout the both speeches. Let's start with something really interesting, right? They say two broad things within the whip speech. The first is building upon their previous analysis that there is no social cohesion among the Eldian identity, that this identity isn't one that you should be proud of. And the second is that there is likely to be additional scrutiny on your parents in case you are disloyal. Let's deal with both of these very, very quickly because I don't think these are generally good arguments to make within the round. Firstly, on this idea of having no social cohesion, panel, I need you to understand that this makes the debate very dysfunctional if this argument is credited. Why so? Because if there is no social cohesion or if the Eldian identity is one that you should not be proud of, then it's important to understand why that identity is not to be proud of to begin with. This is something that Bilal already establishes within his speech when he tells you that the very nature of why your identity is a pain in the ass for you is because of the monster that lurks inside of your body. That is to say, the whole idea that that you're just going to turn into, let's say, this demon that you cannot control, this monster of the night, this creature of the night, and whatever. I think insofar as this is true, the closing government is unable to prove to me what is the utility of going into these sorts of things to begin with. Because note that this utility cannot be on an individualistic scale as they want to point it out. Any utility that government benches want to extend, similar to opening government, who talk about a better chance for your family, I think that an individualistic betterment of utility can only exist when you have an avenue to enjoy that life to begin with as well. That new life isn't just going to happen in isolation. You should also have the time to enjoy any sort of utility that you're reaping as well. But I think insofar as your entire lifespan is reduced to, let's say, 13 years, I'm pretty sure then you're not going to have any time to enjoy these because of two reasons. First of all, military training is likely to take a lot of time. You're a fucking teenager, for God's sake, so you're definitely going to need so there's definitely some time there as well. But secondly, I think that the very nature of deployments in a heavily militaristic nation make it very unlikely for you to be let's say undeployed, because your life is going to be ended by the time before your deployment ends, right? But secondly, I actually don't understand that if there is no social cohesion, what is the moral or principle justification for doing anything that the government bench is talking about? Because if you notice Bilal's analysis in the previous speech, when he talks to you about a child's association to negative emotions, how those negative emotions essentially emotions essentially play out, how you need to have agency on your side of the house, on our side of the house. I think both of these primarily give you some semblance of justification as to why you should not do this, right? Just because you can do this does not mean that you should. And I generally think that there is no single justification at closing government, because their entire case is very, very morally pervasive, right? They're literally talking about that you should be selfish because people in your society are generally selfish. I don't think that your identity is bad because you're selfish. Your identity is bad, or your identity isn't one that you can reclaim because of the fucking monster that you turn into. We don't want you to become that monster because we think any chance of reclaiming, any chance of getting a big golden ticket is not going to materialize on government. And here I want to deal with opening government's intuition push as well as closing government's analysis as well, right? And here I'm also going to extend upon Bilal's analysis. They say this is going to be your one big golden ticket to get out of the shithole that your life is. And similarly, opening government also raises a very interesting POI that many kids want to become Navy SEALs to begin with. I don't think that's replicable upon this side of the house to begin with. Why so? Because note, any sort of such emotions of pride or patriotism generally form or are generally have their inception when you are able to actively associate with the masses of the nation without fear of actively getting destroyed in the process. I don't think you have this on their side of the house because of their own analysis that the state literally victimizes you, that the state literally cracks down into you day in and day out, where you're literally fighting for scraps of food. I don't think then you're going to have some positive associations with the state, which makes it very unlikely to be similar replication towards going into the military to begin with in a normal scenario. But secondly, even if that is true, Bilal tells you that if you're someone who has been very, very victimized his whole life, your immediate family or those within your immediate proximity, for example your mother, for example, the sort of emotions that you get into day in and day out are the only things that this child has as protection mechanisms, which are now lost on their side of the house because you're marooned. You're marooned in two respects. First of all, you're not likely to progress because Bilal gives you pretty much a lot of analysis on why there is likely to be very little individuality that you're likely to retain. Your family cannot mourn your death. Your family cannot call out the state for its morally pervasive actions. Your family is not allowed to even associate with negative emotions of sadness, of pensiveness, of moral guilt or disgust that they want to. This disgust, which is likely to be internal to your nature, by Bilal's analysis of your demon form being a crutch for most of your life, and your demon form being socially conditioned as something morally pervasive. I am generally then unsure as to why government has any sort of analysis to prove otherwise. Therefore, I don't think that there is actual benefit for your family as per opening government talks about. But secondly, I think this benefit is likely to be very brittle in its nature as well, token to the entire analysis that closing opposition is able to give up to you. So there's two things I prove to you by this. First of all, I'm able to prove to you that there is no moral justification for anything that they're doing, and on principle, closing opposition takes this debate because we tell you that there are other emotions in your life that are proximate to you, other emotions that are able to elicit a biological response, that is generally very proximate to the child. But secondly, we're also able to tell you that agency, and notice that this agency is very, very important analysis within this debate to begin with, because note, any utility, no matter how marginal it may be, no matter if it may just be talking about your pains and talking about your sorrow, talking about your pain and talking about your sorrow with those around you, even if it is that marginal as to just sharing your bad experiences, we are happy with it. Why? Because that is the only utility that is guaranteed within this round. That is the only utility that you are able to access by your own choosing. You do not get any utility that you do not get utility on their side of the house. You do not get sustainable utility on their side of the house. You don't suddenly retain or reclaim any moral weightage that you may have tried to in the past, which means that it's very unlikely for closing for any government benches to weigh over our side of the house to begin with, right? And the last thing then is that closing opposition proves to you that there is a certain moral pervasiveness towards becoming a titan, which is not likely to go away. We are able to tell you that becoming a titan and having no agency and having brittle associations, not being able to fully express yourself, and not having any benefit that government wants you to have, for all of those reasons, closing opposition.